The gospel lesson today is from St. Luke's Gospel, the 16th chapter, beginning at the first verse. And I'm going to read this story to you from the Message translation. Jesus said to his disciples, "There was once a rich man who had a manager. He got reports that the manager had been taking advantage of his position by running up huge personal expenses. So he called him in and said, 'What's this I hear about you? You're fired, and I want a complete audit of your books.' The manager said to himself, 'What am I going to do? I've lost my job as manager. I'm not strong enough for a laboring job, and I'm too proud to beg. I've got a plan. Here's what I'll do. Then, when I've turned out into the street, people will take me into their houses.' So then he went at it. One after another, he called in the people who were in debt to his master. He said to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' And he replied, 100 jugs of olive oil.' The manager said, 'Here, take your bill, sit down here. Quick now, write 50. To the next he said, 'And what do you owe?' And he answered, 100 sacks of wheat. And he said, 'Here, take your bill, write in 80. Now here's a surprise. The master praised the crooked manager. And why? Because he knew how to look after himself. Streetwise people are smarter in this regard than law-abiding citizens. They are on constant alert, looking for angles, surviving by their wits. I want you to be smart in the same way, but for what is right, using every adversity to stimulate you, to create survival, to concentrate your attention on the bare essentials, and so you'll live, really live, and not complacently just get by on good behavior." Here ends the lesson. We join together now in singing the song, "As Saints of Old." You may remain seated as we sing. I want to read you a piece that was written by Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry is kind of a philosopher and spiritual person who's written a lot of interesting stuff and seems to be, in my mind at least, someone who's a thinking person who doesn't fool around with the unessential things in life but sticks to the important things. He tells this personal story. "I was walking one Sunday afternoon several years ago with an older friend. We went by the ruining log house that had belonged to his grandparents and great-grandparents. The house stirred my friend's memory, and he told how the old-time people used to visit each other in the evenings, especially in the long evenings of winter. There used to be a sort of institution in our part of the country known as sitting till bedtime. After supper, when they weren't too tired, neighbors would walk across the field to visit each other. They popped corn, my friend said, and ate apples and talked. They told each other stories. They told each other stories, as I knew myself, that they had all heard before. Sometimes they told stories about each other, about themselves, living again in their own memories and thus keeping their memories alive. Among the hearers of these stories were always the children. When bedtime came, the visitors lit their lanterns and went home. My friend talked about this and thought about it, and then he said they had everything but money. They were poor, as country people have often been, but they had each other. They had their local economy in which they helped each other. They had each other's comfort when they needed it, and they had their stories, their history together in that place." You've heard that phrase many times before. Maybe you've spoken it yourself. Everything but money. I was thinking about the word everything, you know. We had everything but money. What is everything? You know, if we passed out a piece of paper here and asked you to make a list of everything in light of this story, and the list would be pretty long and different, I think, among all of us. But I think on every list, there would be something that was similar. In fact, there would be a few things that each one of us had written down. When we think of having everything, these are the things that we think of. Now, everything in this story that Wendell Berry told must not have had much to do with possessions, because we're told that the folks were poor. They didn't have much money. And I don't know about you, but when I hear the word poor, not spoken about people over in other countries, or not spoken about people who are really in tough straits, but just anybody being poor, that's kind of scary to me. It took me a long time to realize that when I was growing up, we were poor. We didn't think we were poor, but we were poor. My parents lived from paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes there wasn't enough to go around. Fortunately, my grandfather every once in a while stepped in. He didn't have a lot of money, but he helped us out sometimes. And there were times when some of our relatives were poor. I remember taking groceries over to an aunt and uncle at a particular time in their life when they were really struggling. So poor can be a little scary. And worrying about money is a normal thing, isn't it? Don't we all worry about money to some extent? Some of you are probably more comfortable than others in this room, but each one of us, no matter, still worries about money. And usually when we say we have everything, we're also including money and some security in that. Richard Stearns, who I've talked to you about, who's the president of World Vision, was a big-time CEO for a long number of years and had lots of investments and had a fairly large pile of money. And he felt that God was calling him to do this mission work. He had many more years in the private sector if he'd wanted it. Could have made a lot more money. But anyway, they gave it all up, and they sold a big fancy house, and they got rid of a car that was very expensive and kept a car that was a bit more regular and a few years old, and they moved to Washington State so he could take this job as the president of World Vision, the mission organization. And he talks about the time he was out driving with his son, who was an early teenager, and his son said to him, "Dad, do you ever think you'll get back in the game? Do you ever think you'll get back in the game? You know, when we had all that money? When we had that big house with the swimming pool?" He didn't say that, but everybody knew. Richard knew what his son was talking about. Do you ever think you'll get back in the game? And Richard was saying it was a difficult decision for him to make, but that he believes now he has everything. He certainly has a decent income, but it's nothing like what he had. You've read those stories about CEOs. You know, when we talk about chief executive officer salaries, we're not talking about just a little bit above what you and I make. There's a sort of an everything list that I found in Sojourner's magazine quite a while back, actually. And when you think of what everything is, these were kinds of things that this man, Chuck Mathai, who was a writer for Sojourners, thought we ought to think about when we're making that list of what is everything for me? What is it I want in life? First of all, he says, you ought to think about choices. You can always make a choice, he said. No matter what is done to you, no matter what people think, you have choices. I was thinking about that line when I told the kids a story about the professor. I had a choice. I could have quit seminary. And to tell you the truth, when I went to seminary, it was so tenuous in my mind that I was going to be able to do this, that comment really struck home with me in a very difficult way. I wasn't sure that I was suited for the task anyway. And over the years, several other people have told me I'm not suited for the task. But at any rate, at that time, it was a blow to me. And I had a choice. I could have left. But I really believe that that was what God wanted me to do. Sometimes it's illness that comes to us, and we think we have no choices. And what this man says is, you can think about what you've lost, but you'll go crazy. Or you can say, here I am, what do I do now? There is never a time when you can't make a meaningful decision. You can choose to be grateful.